Morning everybody and welcome. Mike Wassing, Commissioner for New South Wales State Emergency Service. I have with me Deputy State Emergency Response Controller Steve Hegarty and Gabrielle Woodhouse from the Bureau of Meteorology. In terms of our current situation, we are very pleased the fact that it's stopped raining, to be frank. That's right across the state, but we're dealing with the associated impacts definitely in the mid-north coast. And we still do have the remnants of some of the flash flooding, particularly around the Sydney metropolitan area. I want to acknowledge the fact that we have many impacted communities who are very tired. That includes the local emergency service personnel that have been, in many cases, also isolated with their local communities, actively working in terms of flood rescue operations, and now shifting into clean-up operations as well. In terms of current situation, we still have 148 flood warnings. 31 of those are emergency level warnings. The majority of those emergency level warnings are now in terms of isolation. We still have significant populations that are isolated and also significant numbers of individual homes and residences that are isolated as well, and I'll come to that in a moment in terms of how we're supporting those people and communities in terms of resupply operations. That is one of our key focuses now going forward. We have had a total of 768 flood rescues during this operation. Nearly all of those have been in the mid-north coast areas and into northeast, and we have had a number of those overnight, 52 flood rescues overnight in the last 24 hours. Most of those are still associated with people driving through floodwaters. I understand why people, now that the rain is stopped, will be up and about and moving around, but you cannot drive through floodwaters. It is taking up valuable emergency services personnel time and efforts and priorities that are needed elsewhere. It is also obviously a key life risk, and we've already seen the tragic deaths associated with people driving into floodwaters. So I ask people, if you're up and about, moving around, helping out in terms of, as communities do, and this is a wonderful thing that communities will be helping communities, be safe, watch where the traffic is, but do not drive through floodwaters and do not take any associated risk for yourself, for you moving around, or to help others. It is still very dangerous out in many of these locations. Whilst the weather has shifted, the Bureau will talk shortly in terms of some of the associated weather to come, and we are planning for some of that weather, acknowledging that we have many tired crews from all the emergency services. We've already got Victoria and ACT crews and emergency management personnel that are helping us here in New South Wales, and we'll have additional support coming from Queensland. That'll include frontline personnel, including storm operations, as well as incident management personnel as well. Quite comfortable with the current resourcing where we are in terms of the operational tempo. Given that the weather itself has now shifted and we're starting to see a reduction in some of our rescue operations, we don't have any priority rescues currently underway. Our focus is now very much shifted to the resupply operations. That ranges from bulk resupply for large communities that are isolated, and this is all levels of government that are supporting that mechanism in terms of getting bulk resupplies to supermarkets and the like. In addition to that, we've got numerous, and when I say numerous, I'm talking hundreds of individual supplies in terms of medical supplies and food supplies to isolated communities and isolated residences. 132 500 is the mechanism. If you need resupply, is to do that. The SES will be able to facilitate that either through our own means or with others. I also want to thank and acknowledge all the emergency services that are also involved in this resupply, particularly the New South Wales Ambulance Service from a medical perspective, but all of the services, the police service, all of the services continue to support not just the response operations, but the resupply operations as well. Very importantly and very understandably, the focus also now is shifted to the clean-up operations. Some of that clean-up operations has started in local communities, certainly in Taree and a number of other locations. That's in earnest now in terms of the focus. We've got many rural fire service and fire rescue services working with the local community members and the owners of these dwellings and homes to help clean up, wash out and allow communities and people to get back into their homes. This will be a long task. At the same time, we're doing damage assessments to fully appreciate in terms of the seamless transition to the relief and the recovery operations. But we have started that work, and this will scale up in coming days and certainly into next week, again, as we move into the longer term recovery aspects. Many of these communities have experienced this before, in some cases maybe not to this extent, but we'll continue to be there with them, both from an emergency service perspective, from a welfare perspective. There are many community members helping each other, lots of non-for-profit organisations, all levels of government. The Reconstruction Authority we're very closely connected to in terms of planning for the recovery assistance locations that will be forthcoming. All of this is coming together now to work with the communities in terms of the clean-up operations ahead of us associated with the devastating impacts. I'll leave it with at that stage, and I'll now pass to Gabrielle from the Bureau. Thank you. Thanks, Gabrielle.
Thanks, Commissioner. So what we have seen in the last 24 hours has that rain has shifted south and it has now cleared. So we are seeing sunny skies, but unfortunately we are still continuing to see a number of flood warnings in place, and that includes for major flooding at Bulga on the Wallumbye Brook. At this stage, we're still expecting some of those flood levels to slowly recede through the course of the weekend and into early next week, but those flood warnings remain current. In addition to this, across the weekend, although we'll still see generally dry conditions along the coastal areas, we'll start to see a cold front that's going to approach from the west, and with that we are going to see winds start to increase. Now this is going to be particularly true for Monday and Tuesday, when very windy conditions are forecast to be pretty much right across New South Wales and more so across the coastal areas on Tuesday. Now we're talking wind speeds of 30 to 50 kilometres an hour and some gusts up around that 70 to potentially 90 kilometres an hour. So very windy conditions, and we'll also see those temperatures cool off. So wind chill is also going to be a feature over the coming days as we see that system move through. In addition to this, we are seeing tides start to increase, and we're expecting tides to be up near the highest astronomical tide, as well as some dangerous southerly swells developing in the wake of this system next week. So at this stage, there's a number of flood warnings still in place, and that includes across parts of the Hawkesbury Nepean, up through the Wallumbye Brook, and up through the mid-north coast, including at Kempsey and up towards Cootes Crossing at Orara. So we urge people to stay up to date with those warnings on the Bureau's website and app, and I'll pass across. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand there were some questions about a missing person that we've been reporting since Wednesday. So at 9:20 p.m. on Wednesday, there was a report of a 49-year-old male that was missing around that Nimbola area. He was walking around the flooded waters, around the flooded and affected roadways. He hadn't been seen and he hadn't returned home. Police, emergency services, SES, RFS all attended that location and searched for that male. And unfortunately unsuccessful in locating him. Over the next 2 days, we had daylight coordination searches, and all resources were involved in that search. I can tell you that at about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, we received some information from a member of the public. We attended a location at Kangaroo Point, where that male was located safe and well. Ambulance have assessed him. He's in good spirits and good health, and he is now being reunited with his family.
Do we know anything about what he's been doing the last few days?
He's been briefed now by some of the investigators and the search parties. I'm not aware of those details at this stage.
Is anyone else missing, or are there fears for anyone else?
No, at this stage, there's nobody else missing at this stage. Thank you.
I'll take any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question for the Commissioner. So given that the priority is now looking towards the clean-up, etc., you talked about some of the debris, the process, the long task ahead, and we just heard then that there's going to be some big wins on Monday and Tuesday. What would be your message to the community as they start going about that process?
Yeah, our key message for the community in the clean-up operations is to continue to work really closely with our emergency service operators, the rural fire rescue services that are well drilled and well practiced in this now, because we've had so many events, as well as all the emergency services. Continue to work with them. The SES has got capabilities and capacity to support any of the needs around storm damage operations itself. With the debris and with the clean-up operations, as that weather comes through, we'll need to monitor that community by community and in specific locations. And if it becomes unsafe, that'll obviously be a key part of our messaging. But I think think in general situation, it's a matter of just making sure that we take the appropriate time to work through this clean-up operation and don't rush it. It's really important that the way we do this clean-up operation is with individuals. These are their personal possessions we're talking about, so it's not just a rushing clean-up component of it. This is about being very sensitive to the impacts and the long recovery road for many of the community members that have been impacted.
If I could just do a follow-up, also the roads, I mean, they're going to be looking pretty dodgy, aren't they? So there could be a lot of debris about. What would be your message there?
We still, once even the waters recede, we absolutely have to check roads, the roads network, the transport, the local councils are all doing those processes, and we were working very closely with them to monitor as the water recedes. They do the road checks, the bridge checks to make sure that it's safe. We do that as a normal part of our practice to make sure that before we open some of these communities. So it might be, and this is the thing again, we're asking for people, if there is a road closed and you can't see water, that doesn't mean it's safe. So don't drive around blocked roads just because you can't see water. It means that we haven't necessarily had the transport people out that have made it safe check the roads, because there is going to be road damage, and so this is all concurrently occurring in terms of the coordinated effort right across all of the agencies.
At this stage, how many properties have been damaged, and how long do you expect this clean-up to take?
We're in the estimates in terms of our intelligence mapping, we've got between 8,000 and 10,000 properties that have been impacted by these flood events. Now that doesn't necessarily mean all of those had water into their homes or into their businesses. They may have just minor impacts, but it is significant. The clean-up operations, this is not a few days operation, this is potentially a few weeks operations. And again, we coordinate that in the context of the receding floodwaters and working with the community members. We're very conscious that many of the community members are still in evacuation centres here today. They're tired, they want to get home. We get that, and we'll be working with them to keep them informed of when the right time is to do that, and then support them in terms of the clean-up operations and the continued support from whether it's financially or we're very conscious of the long haul in terms of mental health impacts associated with the recovery. That's why the Recovery Authority has such a great structure in terms of the recovery assistance locations that will be forthcoming.
Do you have any figures on how many people are still in those evacuation centres and displaced from their homes?
I don't have the specific figures, but we are still talking in the hundreds in terms of many of these evacuation centres. They're well supported, but I get that they're very keen to get home. We're just not at that point, even though the weather has cleared. As soon as we can get them out of those evacuation centres and get them back into their homes. In some cases there will be other temporary accommodation, because again, many of the people that have been evacuated for a reason, and it's going to take time before we can actually get them back into their homes, and therefore there'll be alternate temporary accommodation that's being facilitated by the welfare authorities.
Given that the weather's cleared, like you just said, does that mean that the worst of this disaster is now over, or what would be your message around that?
Really difficult context to question is, in my experience, the worst impacts that people feel is often after the event. The impacts are devastating in the context of the floods themselves. To see your personal possessions or your business impacts, that's usually felt afterwards, and that's why the context of worst is probably contextualised in that sense. From an emergency services perspective, the worst is over, but we've still got a lot to do. From a community perspective, that's not necessarily the same situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.